The member's time has expired.
Thank you, sir.
Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good to be taking a call in this estimates debate, and I want to speak about the issue that's been hanging over this government like a dark cloud all through the preparation of this budget, the delivery of the budget, and in fact the aftermath of the budget, and that is the housing crisis. And there are many items in the budget, and ministers have been along to select committee and talked extensively and been grilled on their housing policies. And I want to do a bit of an overview, bit of a summary of those different housing policies and evaluate them. Apart from the members opposite, I think everybody in this House, and in fact everybody in the country, accepts that we have a housing crisis. Let's just look at the kind of headlines. Most recently, in the last few days, 26% annual house price inflation on average nationwide. 26%. That is unbelievable. That actually puts New Zealand's house price inflation right up there with a handful of the international cities that have the fastest growing house prices. Any day now, the average house in Auckland is going to hit $1 million in value. $1 million value, average house across the whole Auckland region. You wouldn't have believed it a while back. We've got the lowest home ownership rates in 65 years, and hardly a day goes by without some new revelation of the squalor and homelessness that people are suffering as they are squeezed out the bottom of the rental market. And most recently, I think, we saw revelations that the government had been referring desperate people, homeless people, to some of the worst slum landlords in South Auckland who were charging them several $100s a week to live in unconsented garages and entire families crammed into a single room of a shared house. So that's the situation we're facing. What is the government's response to this housing crisis that's now enveloping the country? Well, most recently, Nick Smith ratcheted up for the third time in 2 years the house price thresholds for the Home Buyer Assistance Scheme, Home Start. It's the third time in 2 years the minister has had to increase the thresholds because house prices are increasing so fast. In the last 12 months, it turned out that only 9% of these Home Start grants were made to people in Auckland, and that just shows you that this kind of tinkering policy, providing some subsidies for first home buyers, has been rendered obsolete by skyrocketing house prices in the Auckland housing market. The special housing areas, which have been really the centrepiece of the government's housing policy in Auckland, have been around for nearly 3 years. They have resulted in, we think, about 1,200 completed homes in 3 years. Now, a 42,000 shortfall of homes has built up since National has been in office. 42,000 homes. That's how much Auckland is short on dwellings. And the government's big policy, special housing areas, has delivered only 1,200 homes in 3 years. A spectacular failure. Nick Smith's policy to develop vacant Crown land, which he announced 2 budgets ago and updated with more money in the most recent budget. He's been scrambling around trying to find scraps of land, power substations. He even had cemeteries, he even had Old Government House on the list. And he promised 500 hectares in the budget before last. He's found 20 hectares. And I think he's only announced 3 development deals for that land. Again, promising big, but delivering very, very small. By contrast, Mr. Speaker, I want to just say, by contrast, Labor's policies in this area, a commitment to actually build 100,000 affordable homes. That's what Labor's going to do, an average of 10,000 new affordable homes for first home buyers every year. It's going to create 5,000 new jobs in the construction industry. It's going to ramp up the building and construction sector to the equivalent of the top of the cycle and maintain it there for a decade. It is a serious policy designed to change the market dynamics, revive and sustain a flagging building and construction industry that is struggling to match the kind of red-hot demands that we see at the moment. Labor's announced that we're going to legislate for an affordable housing authority, a central government mandated urban development organisation that will maintain the government's urban land holdings and set up project-specific urban development authorities to deliver thousands and thousands of new affordable homes in the context of high-quality master-planned new developments. We've proposed a whole new approach to managing urban growth that recognises that by restricting and stopping cities from growing up and growing out only has one effect, and that is to drive land and dwelling prices up. And Labor's proposing a whole new approach, far more radical, far more courageous and thoughtful than the kind of business as usual approach that we've seen from the national government with their national policy statement, which came out just after the budget. Actually far more of a bold reform than the Auckland Council's unitary plan, which is just a kind of business as usual approach with a bit more upzoning and a bit more greenfields land. So this is the kind of tinkering, business as usual, lacking in ambition that we've seen from the national government. Let's talk about the influence of speculators in the housing market, because that's something that is a big topic for debate. When 46% of all property transactions in Auckland at the moment are going to speculators, 46%. The staggering levels of house price inflation that we're seeing in places like Wellington, Tauranga, Hamilton and others now are being caused by Auckland property investors fleeing the Auckland market because of the Reserve Bank's loan-to-value ratio lending restrictions and driving up house prices elsewhere around the country. So what's the government's approach? They introduced last year a 2-year bright line test saying that if you flick a house within 2 years of buying it, a rental property, you're going to pay income tax. Treasury told them it would be ineffective. They said it would be lucky if it raises $5 million. What Labor's promised, we're going to push that out to 5 years, so that if you sell a house, a rental property, within 5 years of buying it, you will pay income tax on the capital gain. That, sir, is a serious policy. We've signalled we're going to move on negative gearing. Last year, property investors pocketed $650 million in tax breaks as a subsidy for speculation. Negative gearing is the practice of being able to write off your losses on a rental property. If you're getting in less in rental revenue than you're getting in, than you're paying in mortgage interest, you can write off those losses against other taxable activity. Labor's going to put a stop to that. And the biggest contrast is the government's dodgy manipulation of the foreign buyer data that LINZ has been gathering for the last 9 months, claiming speciously that the data shows only 3% of people in the market are foreign buyers. It's obvious, and they were ridiculed and laughed out of town by the commentators and by the media when they released this data a couple of weeks ago. It's obvious that it's much more than that, probably 2 or 3 times as much. Let's look at the rental sector finally. More than half of New Zealanders rent, Mr. Speaker. We've seen Nick Smith's policy to set insulation standards which have a giant loophole in them, allowing redundant insulation standards to continue in rental properties. We're seeing a systematic selling off of state houses. In the middle of a housing crisis, the government has reduced the total number of state houses by a net 2,500 in the middle of a housing crisis, while it's pulled $500 million in dividends out of Housing New Zealand, while people are living in garages and campgrounds. It's unbelievable. Sir, Labor will set standards for healthy, dry homes. We will make it illegal for landlords to rent out cold, damp, mouldy homes, and this Parliament will have a chance to vote for that when Andrew Little's bill comes back to the House. We are going to revitalise state housing in the 21st century. We're going to stop national sell-off. We're going to bring Housing New Zealand back into the core public service with one job, and that is to put a decent roof over the heads of people in this country who need it. We will build more state houses and increase the total number of state houses by at least 1,000 a year until demand is met. And we will more than double the current funding available for emergency housing. Paula Bennett made a great show of saying that she was going to spend $10 million a year to fund emergency housing for the homeless, but had to come to this House and admit that it would not generate any new places. We will, Labor, sir, will do the job properly.
Melissa Lee.